Maureen Muldoon, and I'm here to share the message that was shared this past Sunday at SpeakEasy. The conversation this past Sunday was based on the strength of transparency. So if you've ever been confused about the next couple of facts, this talk will hopefully clear that up. The facts are: God loves you, God's love is transparent, God's love is unconditional, and you are worthy, we are worthy of that kind of love. And those are the facts. But we have lived underneath this illusion of this broken down God. We have this odd and old idea of a vengeful God, a judgmental God, a vindictive God, a sneaky God, a bipolar God. Adam and Eve and those type of stories did nothing to clear up the confusion. You see, it's always been a perception problem. We inherit a broken down story, we project a broken down story, we decide that we want to see a broken down story, and because we only see a part of the story, we don't see the whole story. The story's not transparent. We end up seeing what fear will have us see, which is nothing. You know, they say that love is blind, but love is not blind. Fear is blind. Fear is blind as a bat. So transparency is strength because it tells the whole story. It hides nothing and it has nothing to hide. It actually means being seen in the most authentic way, where there's no shade, no agenda, no fixing, no changing. I feel like I went through this whole list last Sunday too. It's just like light. Last Sunday we were talking about light, so transparency is just like light. It reveals the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But what it does reveal is it reveals this very pure, innocent, perfect, uncomplicated, stunning side of the scenario. It's the truth. It reveals the truth. Transparency reveals the whole and holy truth. When you stand in your truth and you know your worth, your well-being, you know your way, when you know yourself and you no longer allow yourself to be defined by outside scenarios, you become impeccable. You know, you become like, people can't mess with you. That's a beautiful thing. That's not just hot, that's holy hot. That's holy hotness, you know, and you've experienced that when you're just in your knowing, when you are fearless. It's a beautiful state. And I think this is why the 12-step program is so near and dear to my heart, because it's where I learned rigorous honesty. And rigorous honesty was not just something that was suggested. It was like, you are rigorously honest or you will die. So that sort of makes you want to show up to being transparent and being rigorously honest. And it's not necessarily something that is prescribed or promoted or practiced. It's not something that people are groomed on. I mean, we live in this storm of fake news and filters. Fake news and filters, my friends. We live in this world of desired distortions where we have these phones and these filters and these photos that we project out into the world. And it's not just our photos that we distort, but it's our words, our reasons, our thought systems. Like, they're all sort of distorted so that we can project as opposed to just be. Because when we're projecting, we still think that we're going to get something from the world. And there's really nothing to be gotten that's worthy from the world. But still, we attempt to hide beneath these identities, and we don't let anyone know like what we hold in our hearts or what we harbor in our head. We let all of our truth be watered down and sugar-coated and twisted and meted out so that by the time it hits the air, I mean, it has none of the nutrients that can be carried from delivering the truth. The truth is so delicious. You know, the truth sets us free. You know, think about the little boy in the Emperor's New Clothes. He was just like, the king's naked, man. And everybody, I think, I don't know if they actually said this in that part in the story, I imagine that everyone was like, oh, thank God. Thank God somebody had the balls to speak the truth. So where we could have this transparency and this power, instead we spend a lot of time weaving these webs that we get caught in. Isn't that crazy? I know it's crazy because I was a big old friggin' liar for a lot of my life, and I was always caught in a web. I was always caught in having to think way too hard about what I said to who and when. But, that's what it looks like when you're an addict. Don't judge me, man. All of this is based on the authority problem. And the authority problem, in A Course in Miracles, it says the authority problem is judgment, and that judgment is the authority problem. So, in the beginning, there was a judgment. God said, "Oh my Lord, I love you, and all is well, and all is good." And then we were like, meh, as RuPaul would say, meh. No, it's not. It's not really good. I don't really like it. He's not really that good, and the soup needs more salt, and why are you always late, and I can't believe it's raining outside. But that's what we do. Like, God said, this is great, and we're like, we find 1,000 reasons to project our judgment out into the world. That's what takes us directly to hell. Do not pass go. That's what takes us directly to hell. Because when we judge, it's our addiction to being right. And in order to be right in that scenario, we have to make God wrong. And in order to really make God wrong and bad and judgmental, we got to start propagating this illusion that God is bad and vengeful and angry and kicked us out of Eden. We didn't get kicked out. We left. You and me, we left. We were like, we're out of here. We want our judgment. And our apples, thank you very much. We'll be heading out the back door. Totally forgivable. And God's like, okay. And we maintain this illusion every time we pick up judgment. So every time we pick up judgment, we're like, yeah, we're still good outside of Eden. We're fine. Don't worry about us. We're doing quite well over here with our judgments and our apples. And it's too bad that God is so mean. It's kind of funny. So God says everything is good and beautiful and holy, and we start to judge. And it seems like we have every right to judge because the world does not look good or beautiful or holy. It would be unwise of us to not tell the truth. I'm not saying that there are not bad people, places, and things in the world. Perhaps there are. This is not that argument. You can decide that for yourself. But what I will say is if you come across a person who doesn't appear to be good, beautiful, and holy, and you judge them, you continue to condemn them to that broken definition that they have taken on and that you continue to maintain for them. Conversely, if you come across somebody who is not appearing good and beautiful and holy, so when we see somebody like that, instead of judging them, what we are called to do is love them. And I promise you, and you already know this, if you love something, you can love it more quickly into a healed and holy state than if you judge something. If you judge something, it's gotten no chance to heal. But you already know that because you're so smart and so good and so beautiful. Now, when we think about, is that my role to love the unlovable? Is that how I'm going to heal the world? Well, it's an extreme example that a lot of people bring up. Like, what about Hitler? What about the World Trade Center? Like, we're supposed to love that shit? And that's an extreme example. But what I would say is, don't worry about that. You're not here to heal the world. You're here to heal your mind about the world. Can you just do that? Can we just do that? Like, that would be a way, that's like the Cliff Notes, you know what I mean? We're like, do we have to read the Odyssey? No, you could have the Cliff Notes, you could have the Cliff Notes and just heal your mind. Oh, okay. I'm still going to complain about having to read the Odyssey, just because it looks so hard to have to heal the whole world. Okay, but you could have the Cliff Notes, and you could know all of this in the Cliff Notes just by healing your mind. Yeah, I know, but I want to go the hard way. You ever been there? Every time we judge a brother or a situation, we're wrestling with God. And God says to us, like, hey, I got that covered. Like, you don't have to judge. You don't have to judge anything because I got that covered. Remember, I did the first judgment, and I'm going to do the last judgment, which not to ruin the ending, but the first judgment is the last judgment. And you don't have to do any judging. And we're like, I know, God, but like, we're just here to check your work. So we're just going to check your work and make sure that you judged everything appropriately. Probably didn't, so we're going to do some judging for you. You're welcome. Welcome. If we agree with the judgments of God, that this is good and beautiful and holy, then we get to stay in the Garden of Eden. And if we don't agree with the judgments of God, and we say, this is not good, beautiful, or holy, this is bad, this is a shitstorm, this is horrible, and that's our choice. Like, our judgment, literally, we can't stay in Eden and have our judgment. Like, that's the thing that's a thing that gets us out the back door. Gets us transported to the place of duality and death. So God writes a story that says, I love you, you're good, beautiful, and holy. But that's God's story, and we don't trust it, so we want to write our own story because we have an authority problem. And we're like a spiritual 2-year-old wrestling with the pen of God. We're like, give me that pen. I want to tell it my way. But it gets complicated because it's like, if God is so good, why did God place this tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the middle of Eden, the Garden of Eden, where all was good? But yet there's a tree that is about the knowledge of good and evil. And it feels like God just placed a bowl of unwrapped candy in the middle of the preschool. Like, wouldn't a wise enough God know, like, we have no willpower? What I will say is, if you believe that God would place a tree in the middle of the Garden of Eden to trick us, then you have every right to fear God, right? That would be a very divisive God. Children will do what children are taught. And if you are taught about a judgmental God, then you will fear God. And not only that, but you will probably begin to think that judgment is a good and helpful protective device for you. Because if there's something to fear, then you're going to need protection. So we use this judgment to try and keep ourselves safe. But judgment is about as safe as a fig leaf. In the story of Adam and Eve, there's this really odd moment. It's even more odd than the talking snake or the God that would banish his children. It's a moment in the story, Adam and Eve, after they're both like totally feasting on the apples, that they attempt to hide behind a fig leaf. And God figured out that they had eaten from the tree because they were cowering behind this fig leaf. And they were just drenched in guilt. And God was like, oh, I see what happened here. It's like when you come into the bathroom and your 3-year-old has lipstick all over her face and the wall and the mirror, and you're like, what happened? They're like, I don't know. And God saw this guilt, and where they were once these naked, cute, little, frolicking, innocent people running around the Garden of Eden, that now they were like these guilty, cowering, small children trying to hide behind fig leaves. That's an interesting perspective, I think, of what guilt does to us. It makes us so small and so weak. One of the problems that I had with this story, aside from the talking snake, was that God said that if you eat from this tree that you will die. And yet Adam and Eve didn't die. So God kicks them out of the Garden of Eden, and then God says to them, like, not only are you kicked out, but Eve, you're gonna have painful pregnancies, and Adam, you're gonna have to win everything over by the sweat of your brow, and you're gonna have terrible lives, and your children will grow up to kill each other. It's like, damn, that's harsh. It's a terrible story. And it makes God look really, really bad, and it makes us look really, really bad. And if you believe that kind of creation story, again, like, how can you not fear God if you believe that kind of creation story? So I don't believe it. I think maybe there was a man named Adam and a woman named Eve, and maybe there was this tree in the middle of the Garden of Eden that was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And maybe they were given some pretty good advice, like, don't eat the fruit, it will kill you. And maybe prior to eating the fruit, there was no death. Maybe it was just like A Course in Miracles says, that into eternity we're all as well. So eternity means there's no death. So into eternity we're all as well. There crept this teeny mad idea at which we remembered not to laugh. So if there's this place where all is well, where all was good, how could there be this tree that could kill you? And it brings us back to this question of, is God tricking or tempting us or trapping us? Is God making us look bad? What I know for myself is that God is not tricking or trapping or tempting us. God is not even trying to teach us, because in the Garden of Eden there's no schools, it's recess 24/7. God sees us as good and beautiful and holy, and we're the ones who reauthored the story. We're the ones with the authority problem. The tree is in the garden because God loves us and trusts us. And God's love is unconditional and transparent, just like I said in the very beginning of this talk. That's why the tree's there. God said, I want to give you everything, and everything includes everything. We're not robots. God's love allows us to be free. And we can't be free unless we have freedom of choice. And the freedom of choice comes from knowing that you could choose not God. You could choose the absence of God. You could choose the absence of love. God loves us so much that God's like, in this scenario, you get to experience your own free will by choosing not to love. God doesn't say, I will make you good by only giving you good to choose from. God says, you are good, and I trust that you're going to make the decision for goodness. I think that's so beautiful. I think that's a good God. God basically said, you can live in the Garden of Eden where all is well, and let me take care of the judgment. And if you decide to live without judgment, you will have laborless births. Everything that you need will be given to you through grace. Your children will grow to know happiness and health. Or you can choose to know judgment. And if you choose to know judgment, you will have this experience of duality. And you will have painful labors, and creativity will be very hard. And everything will come by the sweat of your brow. And your children will grow up to murder each other. And that sounds crazy, but also obvious to which we have chosen. But we could choose again. How do we choose again? How do we unring that bell? How do we return to love? How do we let go of that addiction to judgment? Well, I like this little clue. You know, the knowledge of good and evil. Evil is live spelled backwards. So when we choose evil, we go into this state that's unlived. And that's where we, quote unquote, sort of die. We die to our potential. It's not death that kills us. It's judgment that kills us. It's judgment that divides us. And divided we fall. Course in Miracles says, only those who give over all desire to reject can recognize that their rejection is impossible. Basically, it means that God has never rejected you. You are unrejectable. You can choose to reject yourself, and you can choose to reject your brother, and you can choose to reject the soup if it doesn't have enough salt, and you can choose to reject your friend if they show a plate, but you cannot be rejected by God. God's love is your natural inheritance. God's peace is your natural inheritance, and everyone is free to reject their own inheritance. That's sad, but generous. Free will lead to freedom, and judgment will lead to stagnation. So do not believe that you can judge and not be subjected to the divisive nature of judgment. And I know that giving up judgment is like giving up breath for most of us. But to practice would mean to get really present with where we actually are. And just move into that beginner mind, that mindfulness that just says, is this so? To be curious, to activate a little bit of wonder. So that's the story of Adam and Eve. God doesn't judge you, but God loves you enough to give you the ability to judge. And it's a good God, not a vengeful God, not an angry God. If somebody were to say to you, you could walk on the sidewalk, or you could walk on the trails or on the pathways, or You could walk on all the fields, but don't walk on the freeway, because on the freeway you will know good and evil. Because you'll probably get hit by a car and smashed. And if somebody were to give you that advice, you'd think, well, that's okay, that sounds like pretty good advice. Even I've never walked on the freeway, so I'm just going to trust you. But then maybe after a while, if you're like me, you'll start to think, like, what's up with the freeway? We should go to the freeway. Has anybody else been to the freeway? Who wants to take a road trip to the freeway? And then we head up to the freeway and we get to know, you know, the knowledge of good and evil. God's simply asking us to trust God, to leave the freeway and the judgments to God. We can't handle it. We don't have to handle it. And you might be like me, somebody who has not always trusted good advice when it comes. We can grow in our spiritual maturity to be able to learn how to trust a little bit more today. Remember, into eternity we're always well. There crept a teeny mad idea at which we forgot to laugh. So instead of laughing at the situation, we judged it. And we're not here to judge. In A Course in Miracles it says the first judgment will be the last judgment, and after that there will be no judgments. Judgments has always involved rejection. So this rejection, even though it seems to be at our brothers or sisters, it's something within us that we don't love about ourselves, and we reject it and we project it out into the world so that we never have to heal it. Instead, when you feel that trigger of wanting to judge, say, right here in this moment, my consciousness is ready to expand. And I could go the way of judging, and I can keep my truth from me, and I can hold myself outside of the Garden of Eden. Or I can take this invitation to love and allow myself to love. And just see what that would feel like. It's a scientific experiment. Play around with it. Because at this point, my friend, you and I are both too big and bold and beautiful and brilliant to attempt to hide behind a fig leaf. You know what I'm saying? It's time. It's time to play our part in love. If we learn to cast shade from the illusion of a judgmental God, we can learn to shine light from the acceptance of a brilliant and benevolent God. Right? So we just have to change our minds about God. This is our true inheritance. I know who I am. I'm God's love. I know who you are. You're God's love. There's strength in the transparency of that truth. And today we get to live in the strength of transparent love. Namaste again.